Okay, to discuss this week's readings, we're talking about television as monstration. And there's a very big difference between the word demonstration and monstration, according to the author. The difference, namely, being in the concept of what each includes. So, while demonstration is basically exactly what the word would mean in Greek, it means demos, which means to show something the way it is. The author is basically arguing very logically that what we call news or documentary or footage that we see, this isn't demonstration, this is monstration. The reason being, it's edited, it's chosen, there's a viewpoint, there's an angle, an approach to the story. The news isn't raw data, it isn't the way it really is. See, even when if you were documenting something, even if you put a camera in front of someone, things are no longer the way they really are, because they are now performing for the camera. So even if you don't edit, they are performing for camera, which means it is a form of monstration, whether you intended it to be or not. Demonstration would be best when you look at things like surveillance cameras, surveillance footage that isn't shown. When people are not aware there's a camera recording, no editing is done, no additional commentary is done, nothing is added upon to the scene. That's demonstration. Demonstration has a problem, though, of course, for the audience, which means there's no context. They don't understand what that footage was taken, why it was taken, what's its importance. There's no critique, there's no analysis. So the audience is given raw data, which is true, and it's a lot more factual, but there's no actual ability for the material to be palpable. There's no ability for the audience to really understand this kind of material, especially in today's age where the audience wants a quick answer. They don't want an investigation into the material that is not interesting. They want it to be fast. This is the premise of the new digital age, the speed in which you retain information or obtain information. So to that end, demonstration is surveillance footage or footage which is not edited, not performed, has no viewpoint and no angle. It is simply the way things are. Nearly everything we do see is monstration, which is edited footage. It's modulated for attention. What does that mean? It means we select segments out of it. We add critiques, we add words that would make it more palpable, more interesting to the audience. So modulation for attention, editing, viewpoint, this is all part of monstration. So everything you see on the news, or at least 99.9% of what you see on the news, what you see in a newspaper, even if they are centralized, even if they are government run or have editors and gatekeepers, as we call them, even with that, this is all still monstration. It is an altered, summarized, for attention reality. It isn't reality as such. It's very important to understand that, because you're not looking at the facts. You're looking at the facts as presented by a certain person, and it contains their subjective analysis and point of view into the material. So monstration comes in two forms. You either have central monstration or peripheral monstration, which is an additional thing now due to the digital age. So before digital age, you'd only have one form of monstration, which is central. Central monstration is government-run newspapers, TV stations, and even non-government run, but basically these big stations and big newspapers have editors, gatekeepers, they have a sense of responsibility. They distribute the news from the center out. So they are our central news stations. So even when you look at Lebanon, although our TV stations, and we'll get to them in a different reading, but although our TV stations honestly are kind of a failure when it comes to objectivity, but they are still the main news source. They are still the central news source, they and the newspapers. In digital form or printed form, they're still the central news which distributes to the outside. So news and monstration can go one way or the other. It can go from the center, from the main outlet of news, out to the extremities, to the peripheral outlets of news, or it actually can reverse. So that's central news. Peripherals monstration is monstration on social media, on personal blogs, on hand letters, in protests, Peripheral means from the outside towards the in. So it's more of the audience speaking. Peripheral Monsteration, of course, lacks an editor or a gatekeeper, so there's no real verification of news. But at the same time, there tends to be more veracity. People tend to believe peripheral news more because there's no big central voice, there's no edit, there's no government control on it. It is just the people representing themselves. So it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, peripheral news can be a great source for fake news and can misinform people. But for the majority, at least till now, especially when things happen like civil disobedience, revolts, anti-government movements, peripheral news tends to be more reliable than central news because it doesn't need to worry about editing and government control. It can actually release facts as it is and released by audience members or participants in the actual field at that time when it happens. So when peripheral news publishes big things and they become a hit and they're verified, central news then would pick it up. So this distribution of information goes the opposite. It starts from the outlines and goes into the middle. So it goes from the outskirts of things and then back into the middle of things. So that's the main issues. The other last thing I want you to understand is there are now something called a polymedia event. So polymedia event means, poly means many, media event as in, it's not necessarily just news or not necessarily just TV. It could be multiple mediums that present the same thing. So if you're looking at what's been happening in Lebanon right now in 2019, in November and October, you would see many polymedia events. You would see, for instance, the cartoons that were made or the memes that were made that then actually made it back into central news. So one of the songs that were popularized that were slanderous to one of the politicians was actually run by Times Magazine. So that's a central news station. That's a central news distribution. It was made by the peripheries. It was made by average people. It was created in the streets by people chanting. Then somebody made it into an actual song. And then it got picked up by peripheral agencies, which is people's social media distributing it. Then it got picked up by Central. So this is a polymedia event. It's sung in the streets. It's made into a clip. It's made into cartoons. It's made into drawings. It's made it into newspaper print. It made it into TV. And it made it into digital media. So it's got different platforms for the same source of information. That's a polymedia event. And when you're talking about Monsteration, polymedia events tend to have the biggest impact because they go across all these platforms and they are a way for people to be reached on several different levels. And time equals love. So the more the audience actually sees this polymedia event in its all forms, the more it becomes a recognized icon and something everybody knows about. Thank you.